New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Lynn Katz, and I'm a guest host on the New Thinking Aloud, produced by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. Today's topic is Bigfoot, and we'll be talking about how Bigfoot may be both a physical creature and a metaphysical creature as well. What does that mean exactly? Well, to find out, we'll be speaking to legendary filmmaker Brett Eichenberger. Brett has produced two extraordinary documentaries. The first is called Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and the second is Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. Brett lives in Oregon, and he has traveled all over the country, speaking to people who have not only witnessed Bigfoot, but had some very meaningful personal experiences. And as we'll hear from Brett, some of these Bigfoot encounters really fluctuate depending on region. We will also be talking about how there's some very strange and unexpected phenomenon that happens in relation to Bigfoot that you just normally wouldn't associate with this big, hairy creature. So there's so much to talk about with Brett, and we had a great interview, and I'm so pleased to bring this to you now. Let's get started. Do you find that there are Bigfoot sightings right where you live, or where would you say they are in Oregon?
They are everywhere in Oregon, maybe with the exception of some of the more deserty areas, of course, because there's really no place for them to hide. But there's been sightings literally all over eastern Oregon, throughout the Columbia Gorge, throughout the Cascades from Washington to California. There seem to be hot spots down near Grants Pass, the Siskiyous. There's a lot of really strange stuff that occurs down there.
What would you say is more of the stranger stuff compared to not so strange?
Well, man, how much time do we have? Because what's really interesting to me is that there's no such thing as like a normal Bigfoot sighting. And if you were to classify a normal Bigfoot sighting, it would be the classic Bigfoot runs across the highway, and there are many of those. In fact, I read a report recently of a woman that saw one within the last few years run across Highway 26 near Mount Hood, which is a very heavily traveled highway. But as far as some of the strange things are concerned, you run the gamut from everything from the physical to the non-physical. For instance, we have some video footage of one cloaked in our film, A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. So you have people that have seen them cloaked, and and when I say cloaked, it's kind of like, it almost looks like the Predator effect from the movie Predator. You can kind of see an outline or a shape, and it distorts the whatever is in the background behind them. So there's those. There's people that have seen them transform into orbs. There's people that have seen them walk into trees, literally walk into trees. We have a report from a woman that we want to interview that watched one walk into a tree in Los Angeles County. This is, a very heavily populated area, and this was in a park. So it just gets weirder and weirder and weirder, I swear.
So you have produced two movies, and the first is A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and then the second is A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. Can you talk about the difference between those two films?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people ask this question. So basically, when we started doing the first Bigfoot film, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, we thought that was going to be the all-encompassing film on Bigfoot, right? But what ended up happening shortly into the production of that film is we ended up um, getting these stories of this strangeness, this weirdness that doesn't really lend itself to Bigfoot being purely a flesh and blood, animal or being that's hiding in the forest. It was telling us that there's something else that's going on. And so this has been a topic of argument, or it's just been a challenging thing. Let me put it that way, in the Bigfoot community, where there's folks that believe that they are purely flesh and blood. And then there's other folks that believe that they have these woo-like or strange paranormal type abilities. And so we felt like the best thing for us to do is to split the movie into two parts. And so in the second film, we hear from some of the same people that we heard from the first film, only this time they're now talking about some of these strange paranormal experiences that they've had, which include mind speak, telepathy. They include, cloaking, like I was mentioning. They include, these footprints that stop, and they don't turn around. It's as if it just dematerialized or just went into a different dimension, something like that. And then they include gifting. And, some might say, well, yeah, there's other animals that gift, crows and whatnot. But these particular instances, these Bigfoot, it's almost like they're reading your mind when you're receiving this gift. It's like they're especially for you. It's a personal experience. So yeah, we broke them up into two movies, and I feel like we barely scratched the surface as to what is out there and what people are experiencing.
You said there's two ways of looking at the whole Bigfoot phenomenon. Do you find within the community there's arguing or debating? Like, do people get pretty riled up about their positions, or are they pretty amicable to each other?
They can get pretty riled up. We've had a number of comments from folks who, think that the paranormal side of things is hurting the scientific research. There's a number of people that believe that, and I'm not going to argue with that. I agree. The public perception of the paranormal right now is getting better all the time, especially as we move forward with some of these UAP hearings in front of a national, worldwide audience. It's difficult, I guess, to talk about some of these things because they sound so absurd. They sound so off the wall strange. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a science that will explain some of this stuff. And so in A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, we bring in Dr. Simeon Hein, who has these theories. He's written a book called Dark Matter Monsters. And Dark Matter Monsters talks about some of the strange things in this universe that scientists are only now beginning to understand, and how there might be life forms that would utilize some of this stuff, I guess you could say, such as dark energy, dark matter, cold fusion. And, there is some pretty significant evidence to show that this is actually possible. And this is where it kind of comes full circle back to UFOs and some of the things that people are seeing, in the sky, where they're watching these crafts defy the laws of physics. People are seeing some Bigfoot doing some of the same things, such as the way they run or the way that they move is not animal-like. It's more of like a kind of a gliding kind of a thing. And so there's a lot of theories as to how that happens. Some of the other things that people see are glowing eyes. And, that's obviously when you shine a flashlight at an animal, or if you take a photo of a human, you might get the red eyes and you might see that glow from the back of the eye, or I don't know the science behind it, but Bigfoot generate their own glowing eyes. And I've actually seen them. I've actually seen the glowing eyes. So there's lots of strange stuff.
Can you talk about when you had your own sightings, whether with the glowing eyes or anything else?
So the only real sighting that I've had per se is the glowing eyes. I've heard noises that I can't explain, and I've had, I should say that this includes Jill Remensnyder, the producer, and Mike Ferry, the cinematographer. We heard one, bluff charge us. And, you have to have a healthy bit of skepticism And so we kind of go through the, the rationalization, if you will, of trying to explain what these sounds could be. And ultimately we end up with the idea that this is very difficult to explain other than it being a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. And I ended up getting a photo of the glowing eyes, which I put into the film, and you can see the shape of the eye, and you can see it blink, you can see it change. And that's not something that, you'd be able to accomplish with an LED light or a hoax.
Well, I want to say one of the reasons why I might look a little tired, I'll blame it on you, because I was up last night until 3 a.m. watching Bigfoot, paranormal Bigfoot. And yeah, it's an extraordinary film. And I really was so moved by the opening, even the opening words. And I was wondering if you would mind if I would just read them. It's just a short paragraph, but it starts off with the Native woman talking about how the Native people many years ago saw ships for the first time, and most couldn't even recognize them. They didn't even see them. They didn't even recognize them as anything. They were just invisible except to the mystics. And then when the mystics started to explain what they were seeing, then the other people could see them. And so your film opens with a statement where the Native American woman is saying, when we go out in nature and experience something we can't comprehend, we understand others can't understand for the same reason. And when we speak about what we experienced with grace, dignity, and elegance, others too will perceive the extraordinary, and perhaps they too will experience a flash of beauty. And I love that you started with that, because when you typically think about Bigfoot, the next thought that comes isn't usually beauty, right? It's like this big, scary, weird creature. And then the other thing I really loved about that was those words, speaking about it with grace, dignity, and elegance. And I really felt that you accomplished that in your film. I was so moved by it. And I have to say, since watching it, which again was just not too long ago in the middle of the night, I've been so inspired just to go out in nature and even to see where I live, because we moved to Oregon a few years ago, and this is a very different environment. Before that, I was in the desert of California. And, I still find the wilderness kind of overwhelming, scary, something to kind of avoid. And I felt like, wow, you have all these people not just talking about their extraordinary experiences, but just even going outside and spending the night, even seeing women who go out into the forest by themselves. And so that was really inspiring to me. So thank you for that. Yeah. And so how did you come up yourself with this approach to cover Bigfoot in such a profound and spiritual way?
Well, I think that there's this idea, there's this generalization, like we said, like you just mentioned, that Bigfoot is some sort of a monster. And that's not true. It's not entirely true. Now, there are exceptions to that. There are exceptions to human beings. And I often use humans as an example to kind of correlate with Bigfoot and Bigfoot behavior. I tell people the most dangerous animal on the planet are human beings. And we all know that a very tiny majority of us, or minority of us, I should say, are killers, are terrible, or do bad things and have evil in them. And I think that that's true with Bigfoot as well. I think that the vast majority of Bigfoot just want to mind their own business and have families. And I think that they're curious about human behavior. I think they want to interact. And we show that. We show great examples of that. We show examples of empathy and caring, things that really give you goosebumps, very, very touching things that really can't be explained. But on the flip side of that, there are some instances of, Bigfoot, being very aggressive towards people and, throwing things and, doing things to make sure that that you're not wanted in that specific area. With that being said, I've not met a single person or have really heard many stories of people being physically hurt by Bigfoot. The stories of Bigfoot are either they're just aggressive like any other animal would be, if you were in their home, as a human would be if you walk downstairs and here's somebody standing in your living room, or the Bigfoot being very shy and wanting to have some sort of interaction with people. So we really need to have this kind of like mindset change as to what these things are. And, it's ironic because I blame Hollywood, for a lot of this stuff because horror sells, scary things sell. People want to watch this stuff and they want to get scared. So we're trying as hard as we can to show that that's not really true in nature.
Yeah, that's so true across all topics having to do with metaphysics. I'm a longtime remote viewer and clairvoyant and medium, and we were just at Contact in the Desert because I am also president of the International Remote Viewing Association, and we had a booth there, and people were coming up, and the most common question I was getting from people new to these topics was if I try to do a remote viewing session, like even looking into a box and trying to describe the contents, am I going to like encounter the devil or demons, or is there going to be evil spirits that are going to hurt me? And I was like, really? You're just using your own perceptions to look at some object we've placed in a box and, something is going to jump out and bite you. But that's really, there's so much fear.
And we fear what we don't understand. And this is true throughout human history. It explains the sacrifices and the temples and the things that we built because we didn't understand what the sun was, or, what caused the weather to do what it did and stuff. So it's no different. I mean, if we can't explain it, we can't understand it, then we're automatically scared of it. And we're trying to change that idea. We're trying to say that, it's all based on science. We're not saying that there's not good in the world. We're not saying that there's evil in the world. But what we're saying is that any and every one of these things, whether it's a UFO or it's a Bigfoot, they're working with a science that we don't yet understand. But we shouldn't be afraid of it. We should try and understand it.
A few months ago, I was waking up and I had a flash of a face that the closest thing I could compare it to was Bigfoot. And this happened 3 times over a 2-day period. Nothing else happened. And it was kind of like a still photo just inserted in my mind. And I get a lot of clairvoyant images constantly because that's my line of work, but it's unusual to have something insert itself into my mind. And it didn't go anywhere from there. But I was really taken when I watched the film last night, how many people were describing telepathic experiences. You had one man in particular, the one who had gone out to property in Oklahoma, who had the words inserted in his mind, "Why are you carrying a gun?" And can you talk about that case a little bit? Because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was a really interesting case. Rick Taylor. So we had heard about that case a couple of years prior when we interviewed Arla Williams, and she was very coy about really revealing his information without his permission. So she talked in general terms about it. Eventually, we tracked down Rick Taylor and contacted him and asked him, if he would be willing to go on camera. He said, yes, absolutely. Which we were kind of surprised at because, a lot of people in the paranormal realm are very hesitant about talking on camera for obvious reasons. People that have just seen Bigfoot cross the highway are hesitant to talk about camera, or to talk on camera. But we tracked Rick down and did the interview, and it's just one of the most extraordinary stories I've ever heard. Not only because he had the mind speak And he ended up with something, I don't want to spoil anything, but he ended up with something extraordinary. But because of the fact that they said to him, "Why are you carrying a gun?" It was profound to me that they recognized and knew what a gun was and knew what a gun was capable of doing, and that they were protecting their friend Arla. So it's a story that profoundly moved me for a lot of different reasons, and it raised a lot of different questions as well, as to how plugged in they are to, humans and human society and some of those things. It just kind of goes to show how intelligent these beings are. So we felt like it was essential to put into the film.
He's a former law enforcement agent, and he really ended up having a big time encounter with two. It sounded like. Now, he talked about he saw a male, and then he described a smaller female. So how would someone know if it was male or female?
Sometimes people don't. The interesting thing is that for years, the famous Patterson-Gimlin film, I think a lot of people thought that it was a male. When the technology came around to where people were able to scan that film and get a high resolution look at it, they clearly saw that it was a female because she had breasts. Plain and simple. So that's one way to tell, I guess. They're not really wearing any clothes, and just like humans, they seem to be a little bit more petite than the males. But these things are so clever at hiding that what most people see are just a portion of the body. They might see just the head, or they might see. I've talked to some people that have seen just the feet. They've seen like maybe the knees down. Yeah, that's a great question.
Could you just maybe tell us, go into two of your favorite stories? So, and maybe one about a Bigfoot that was friendly and one about a Bigfoot that may have been more hostile.
Oh boy. This is a very tough question, Deborah. I don't know if I have a favorite story, because they all have like great moments and great attributes. For me, I think what really resonates with me are the gifting exchanges. And in A Flashy Beauty Paranormal Bigfoot, there's a story where Daryl Adams talks about how his wife had recently had open heart surgery. And she was still going through some of the treatment and the recovery process and whatnot. And they'd moved into this new house near Cottage Grove, Oregon, and they set up a hummingbird feeder. And that was, that's Cindy's, kind of pride and joy, is to have these hummingbirds and whatnot. And Daryl and Cindy had started to have these strange interactions with Bigfoot, over the course of the few months that they had lived there. And then one day they come out and there's a glass heart at the base of the tree. And, there was just really no other explanation for it other than it was Bigfoot or some sort of a spirit that was in tune with her recovery process.
So is it possible just someone from the neighborhood put it there? Like, how isolated was their property?
That's a great question. Their property was very isolated. They did have a neighbor. The neighbor just kept to himself. And this is, somebody would have clearly been seen going in their backyard. Daryl and Cindy had also had something happen where they had a softball-sized rock in the middle of their living room. One afternoon when they came home from church, it was just sitting there. So they had all of these really strange things happening. And Tobe was living on the property as well, and he would get these gifts that would be personalized. Just to give you another interesting and funny story. It's not in the movie. Daryl had these like T-bar stakes for a fence in his backyard. And, and again, they're in a rural area, and these T-bar fences are made out of steel. I mean, they're very hard to bend. And one morning he came out there and 3 of them were bent almost all the way over. And he was like, what in the world? I mean, this isn't something an animal would do. This isn't something a human would or really could do by hand. And so he was confused. He didn't know what to think. His fence was ruined. And so he was talking to a friend of his who was also into Bigfoot and had some Bigfoot experiences. And his friend said, just yell into the woods and tell him to put him back. So that's what Daryl did. He yelled into the woods. And the following morning, they were straightened. They'd bent them all the way back. It's an extraordinary story. And I find it kind of funny, too.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, and that did seem to be a theme in your films, that people could ask for something or set their intention or say what they wanted, whether to have a sighting, an encounter, or some kind of sign. And something would happen that was, not just like, oh, well, maybe it's this, like something really extraordinary. And I thought that was a good reminder for us all, regardless of whatever the topic is, to put it out there, what we want, voice it out loud.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We had an instance, we're working on a new film about the Sierra Sounds. And we had a strange instance where on camera, we asked this individual a question. We said, what kind of sounds did they make up there? And immediately one of our camera cases behind us that was open slammed shut. And this isn't something, this is something a human would, or somebody with some strength would have to do, because there was no wind or anything else. Wind wouldn't have shut it. There's no other way that it would have happened. And it was immediately after we asked the question. So who knows?
Yeah, I'm kind of getting chills as you're talking. Well, and also in Paranormal Bigfoot, there is a woman that's being interviewed who she's a clairvoyant, where she did see Bigfoot with her eyes. And then she said she was getting continued telepathic flashes. And then while she's talking, there was a sound that appeared behind her. And you guys captured it, and it was a very unusual, like kind of grunting sound right at that moment.
Yeah, so that was Tara Harris, and she's local to the area of the Owl Moon Lab, and we were doing the interview there at the Owl Moon Lab. Although we don't call it out in the film, that's where we did the interview. And Mike Ferry and a cinematographer were setting up for that interview while Jill and Tara and her friend were off in the woods, and just searching around and stuff. But they were a ways away. And Mike and I just kept looking at each other. We kept hearing these strange sounds, these knocking and stuff. And there was an energy in the air that we could feel. It was really, really strange. We haven't really felt anything since, and we didn't really feel anything before. But for some reason, we just felt like we were being watched. It didn't feel like a scary presence. It just felt like, like there was a crowd watching us. And then during the interview, we get this growl, and we're all just kind of like, "Would you?" And Tara immediately is just like, "Did you all hear that? Did you hear that?" And then I started seeing these like white, little tiny white dots appear, and I went back and looked at the raw footage, and I'd see these like strange squiggle lines, and Dr. Simeon Hine might give an explanation as to what those things were, and they're definitely tied to some of this science behind this stuff.
Yeah, I know Simeon, and I thought he did a really fantastic job in the film of giving some explanations or theories, especially he brought together a lot of different ideas, merging them together. And yeah, he definitely gave some food for thought. Now, when you have these unusual experiences when you're filming, do you feel that it's just you happen to go to the right place at the right time? Or do you feel some of these things are happening because you're filming, like maybe anywhere you went, because you're so focused and have a camera rolling and are so open to these topics that maybe that's why some of this phenomenon is happening?
There's a little bit of both. I think that, some of the reasons, some of the stories that we happen upon, we feel like there's some sort of a guidance that leads us to those stories. They're stories that need and want to be told. And then I feel like, it's a way for them to announce their presence, while we're filming, like with Tara. And I think when, you're dealing with different personalities per the clans or the tribes or whatever you want to call the groups of these individuals in the regions that they live in. And I think there's different type personalities. I think some are more outgoing than others. I think some are more passive and some are more aggressive. And so a lot of it just depends on the area that you're in. Many of the places, many of the locations that we've gone to, we've filmed, we haven't had anything happen. The Owl Moon area was a place that we continuously had strange things happen. We had electronics fail and batteries die instantly and, that kind of stuff. But we didn't experience that in Southern Oregon, for instance. So you never know who you're really dealing with.
Where's the Owl Moon located?
The Owl Moon is, it's near Cottage Grove, Oregon. It's about 10 miles outside of Cottage Grove, Oregon, in the Umpqua National Forest.
Yeah, that's wild. Oh, we sometimes go out there. We have a little Cessna, and that's where we have it parked, is in Cottage Grove at that little airport out there. So that's interesting.
Oh, no kidding. Oh, yeah. So you've been out there. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and then what about Oklahoma? It sounds like that is a hot spot for Bigfoot.
Yeah, Oklahoma is a major hotspot for Bigfoot, and we call that out in our first film that Oklahoma is number 9 of all the U.S. states, which to me is shocking. A lot of people tend to think that Oklahoma is kind of like farmland or barren or whatnot, but down in southeastern Oklahoma, there are really thick forests. There are the Kiamichi Mountains. The home of Bigfoot Highway is down there, and sightings go back a couple hundred years actually in Oklahoma. So, we ended up going out there for a couple of reasons. One, that, Daryl ended up moving out there. He was originally from there. And then Arla Williams has lived in Oklahoma her entire life, and she's had experiences out there. So, we don't want to downplay any of the other states. We have friends that live south in Arkansas and Texas and whatnot, and they have many Bigfoot sightings too. I personally believe that these are a different, sort of a different type. They're definitely different personalities than what we have here in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. I think Alaska they're completely different in Alaska. But yeah, it's, for whatever reason, Oklahoma it must be the barbecue. I don't know. It's a hot spot.
They like good barbecue. Well, that's so fascinating. Can you talk more about how Bigfoot seems to be different in different areas? Can you compare them?
Yeah. A good example of that, I think, is Daryl Wilson's description of what he saw in Western Alaska. And this is an area of the country that is so far removed from the lower 48, and obviously, humans are very diverse. You definitely have the different races, and they're not difficult to distinguish who's who. And I think the same is probably true with Bigfoot. I think that you have, I think Bigfoot they are a flesh and blood creature or being that has paranormal abilities. And I want to be clear in stating that. And I think that if that's true, they follow the biological evolution that other animals would follow. And so I think if they're living in a certain region, whether it's the South, like the skunk ape in Florida, or Alaska, I can't see how they would be the same, because they're dealing with entirely different ecosystems and environments and climates. So a lot of the Bigfoot in Alaska that we've heard stories about are very aggressive. They look different. They're more solitary, whereas some of the Bigfoot that we've heard stories about here in Oregon and or Washington are more family-like. They're more docile. They don't bother a lot of people. That's not always true, though. I mean, there's some, we've heard of some aggressive bands of them or clans of them near Mount St. Helens and whatnot. But for the most part, they're more docile than, like in Alaska.
And then how would they be on the East Coast?
It's interesting. We haven't heard, I haven't heard as many like behavioral stories on the East Coast. One story that has really kind of moved me is this. There's a story that made national news about maybe 10 years or so ago. There was a little boy in North Carolina, and North Carolina is a hot spot, North Carolina and South Carolina. There was a little boy, I think he was 2-3 years old, who went missing in the swamp. And the temperature that night dropped down to, I think in the upper 20s. And they found him a couple of days later, and he was fine. He was fine. They asked him what happened. How did you survive? He says, well, a big friendly bear came and saved me. And, that's, 3 days ago, I'm not kidding you, Deborah, I was in Canada, and Jill and I saw a bear on the side of the road, and we pulled over, and we were 10 feet away from that bear. We got extraordinary photos and videos, and that bear did not look like he was going to help a toddler survive the night. I'm just telling you that right now. I'm just looking at it going, no, he's probably thinking about one thing and one thing only, and that's food. So, this, again, it's national news. Your viewers can Google the story. It's out there. And many, many of us in the Bigfoot community believe that child was saved by a Bigfoot. And we've heard other stories like that too. And I know a Native American woman in Yakima, Washington, who has a very similar story when she was a little girl that she was saved by Bigfoot. In fact, this particular instance, the Bigfoot applied medicine to her, like with mud and herbs and whatnot. She was stung, I think, like 100 times by bees and knocked unconscious. So, but otherwise, I don't know a lot about the ones that are on the East Coast.
Tell us what you consider to be the best evidence ever for Bigfoot, and let's say physical evidence, not just testimony.
That's a tough question. There's a few different things. I think that there's a lot of people that think that the footprints aren't great evidence. I think the footprints are great evidence for a variety of reasons. One is that I think that if you find really good footprints, and there are really good footprints out there, I think that's really difficult to fake. And anthropologists say the same thing. Dr. Meldrum says the same thing. There's DNA that's been found to be unconclusive. We show that in our film, The Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. I think what Tove and Daryl found, these knee prints, I think they're extraordinary. You can see the hair striations in the mud. You can see Tove pulling the individual hairs out. They had the hairs tested, and there was no match. I think that's a profound case that hasn't really gotten a lot of attention, because there's no other animal that really would have made those. They're certainly not bear prints. I've seen the cast multiple times in real life, and they would be massive knees. I think that's a really strong candidate. The DNA evidence that's come up, I feel like scientists are ignoring, because there's a lot of work that's been done in the scientific community to get people, to get this whole evolutionary human thing all figured out. And I think if you throw Bigfoot in there, it screws everything up. Number one. Number two is that a lot of these scientists do not want to lose funding. They don't want to be ridiculed. And so they ignore it. They'll, let somebody else embarrass themselves, I think is what they think, which is cowardly in my opinion. I'll just go out and say it. I think that, we need to really just be courageous and get out there and do the science. Who cares what people think?
Yeah. And, that gets back to the idea of how even those of us that are into these metaphysical topics, we tend to put all these topics on a spectrum of, what's one thing that's more believable than another, or, some of it we can take seriously. Like even I felt like when I was watching the film last night, that I wanted to apologize. And I was like, who do I want to apologize to? Like, should I apologize to Brett, to Bigfoot? Because even though I've been a lifelong explorer of these topics and I'm a professional psychic, but then for me to even talk about Bigfoot, or, even not too long ago, it was taboo to talk about UFOs, even when you're in these fields. So it really gets pretty ridiculous, that some areas of what other people would just dismiss everything that we're into, anything even on this show, even what highly credentialed parapsychologists research, they're oftentimes ostracized by their colleagues. And yet we place these things on a spectrum of, what's acceptable and not acceptable to talk about. And unfortunately, Bigfoot is oftentimes still laughable, and just that we can laugh about it, or laugh about it, we're really being prejudiced. And just like we would if we were laughing about any other race of people. And it sounds like what you're talking about, where they have different individual characteristics and they have different characteristics across different regions. It really sounds like you're talking about people in so many ways.
Yeah. And the Native Americans believe that I don't want to generalize, some Native Americans believe that these are the original people. Almost every tribe in North America has a Sasquatch in their belief system, and they've interacted with Sasquatch. Many of the Northwest tribes traded with Sasquatch, and a lot of them didn't want to deal with Sasquatch because the people had their own way of doing things. The Sasquatch had their own way of doing things, and occasionally those would overlap. Tara talks about that in our film. She talks about how they would share telepathy. They would share between the two of them, in a peaceful way. But I don't think that was always the case, in tribes everywhere. I think it might have been, dependent on where you were and who you were as a tribe and who the Sasquatch were. And the other thing too is we've been told that we should be calling them Sasquatch as opposed to Bigfoot. They don't really care for the name Bigfoot. Some of them have their own names.
Do you feel that the Native Americans today are experiencing Sasquatch, or was this further back in time?
Yes, they're still experiencing it today. I can undoubtedly say that. Many Native Americans, of course, are as skeptical as the average person. The higher up you go, into the elders and, some of the more secretive societies, which still exist in Native American communities, they are still interacting with Sasquatch. I recently heard a story about how a Sasquatch came into a Sundance. I think it was just last summer or the summer before that, walked right through the middle of the Sundance. What people need to understand is that a lot of these tribes keep these things private. It belongs to them. They are private. They don't want media attention. I have been on reservations. I've been invited by natives to experience, what is happening on the reservations. And, you're asking for a lot of trouble if you publicize the fact that you have Sasquatch living on your reservation or that you're interacting with them. And I completely 100% agree with that. They have every single right to keep those things secret and quiet. There's no reason to share it if you don't want the attention.
And just a couple more questions. So if you personally went out into the forest and saw a Bigfoot right there, how do you think you would react? Like if you were face to face with it after all your years of researching them and making films?
That's a great question, Deborah. I ask myself that question all the time. And, just 2 nights ago, Jill and I were driving back from Canada, like I was saying, and we stopped at, 1 o'clock in the morning, or no, it was closer to midnight, I guess, pitch black, Yakima Nation, as we were going over a pass. We pulled over the car, got out, couldn't see anything. And, we were hoping to hear something. And I was hoping, maybe we would see something. I think I would be as afraid as I would be elated. You know what I mean? Because the human mind, my mind still, after doing these documentaries, isn't conditioned to see what these, to actually see one of these and to see how extraordinarily big these things are. I think it would have a profound effect on me. The other instances where I heard things and saw glowing eyes had a profound effect. And I've also had ghost experiences in the past that had a profound effect. So I don't know. I think it would be as scary as it would be neat.
Yeah. And then, so last night, I brought my spouse into the room to watch some of the interviews in Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot. And he tends to not be into these topics, but I knew he would be moved by, especially hearing the testimony of some of these guys that look more like manly men who are foresters and loggers and things like that. And so the two guys that were driving down the road and they saw this enormously tall creature, and then he shrunk down. He was kind of bending over, and then he turned into this bright orange glowing, kind of more looking like, one said it was like an orangutan. And then they saw him like turn into like this energetic square shape that took off. And so here we're getting back into the esoteric. And I thought for a moment, I was like, darn, their story was so like physical and, would appeal to my spouse. And then at that point, he was tired. So he was snoring. So it was okay. Anyway, he didn't see this next part, but just the fact that, it did something that was so esoteric, and which to me makes it even more believable, because if these guys wanted to convince people that they saw Bigfoot, that's the last thing they're going to say is like, yeah, then he melted down and turned into a square orb and shot away. But can you, I know we've talked about this a little bit already, but yeah, how do you reconcile something so strange?
That's a great question. I don't know. You just put it out there and see who else has had an experience like that. And as it turns out, other people have talked to us about seeing similar things, and really when you get down to the nuts and bolts of the way our universe works, it makes sense, because everything in the universe is made of 92 atoms. That's it. 92 atoms. It makes up this table, it makes up the camera, it makes up you, it makes up me, everything. And so when you have something out there that's able to manipulate those atoms, manipulate those molecules, vibrate at different frequencies, then really anything's possible. You can move through other matter. You can move at the speed of light or faster. You can do anything and everything that you want to do. And so I think that, humans, I think at this point in our evolution, really aren't really ready to understand and appreciate that. And I think that there's advanced life forms out there that, whatever it was that Harold and Cody saw may have been from the future. Who knows what it was doing, but they make a great point, is this thing would have been intelligent enough to have known that they were coming and seen them and could have jumped in the bushes, like Superman. He doesn't ever let anybody see him change from Clark Kent to Superman, right? But this thing did. It let them see this transformation, and there was probably a reason why.
Yeah, and they were just driving down the road to work. It wasn't like they were out seeking anything like this, or it wasn't like they're into these topics or anything like that.
Yeah, and it changed their lives. It's something they think about every single day. I mean, if somebody is going to make up a story like that, why would they go have it painted? I mean, Harold never wanted to forget it, so he had it painted. Yeah.
He said yeah, after I saw this, like I couldn't stop seeing it in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And how could you? It would make you question everything that you know about reality. And that's why I think this film is so important. And I think I know these testimonies and hearing what other people are experiencing is so important. And, getting back to the start of your film where again, people sharing their stories, I'll say the three words again with grace, dignity, and elegance. We have to listen to each other. We have to listen to each other's stories. And when we speak about them, to me, speaking with grace and dignity is not even trying to convince anyone of anything, but just sharing like the meaning of what it meant to oneself, and that's where the believability comes in. Cause I think all of these people, they're not benefiting from sharing these stories, right? In some ways, they're opening themselves up to ridicule, and probably some of their families are not too happy that they're sharing such stories to worldwide audiences. Yeah. Now, one question I have to ask you, because again, we do have a skeptical segment of people watching the interview. So I'm sure you've come across people that initially you were really excited, you heard about their stories, and then as you started to listen, they fell apart, or you started to get skeptical yourself. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. What's really interesting about both movies have some extraordinary stories. And we don't just hear somebody's story and say, oh, that would be great in the movie. We really get to know that person. We have them tell the story multiple times. We talk to them. If we don't meet them in person initially, we'll talk to them on the phone at length. And every single one of the people that we put in our films, we feel is telling the truth. We weren't there. We don't know. They may have seen something a little bit different than what they're describing on camera, but we believe that they did see something, and what they're describing is fairly accurate to what they saw. Harold and Cody are a great example of two men that saw something so unbelievable that if it was just one of them, I don't know that I would put it in the film. The fact that they can both corroborate really helps. The other thing, too, is that, Jill and Mike and I come from a world of feature film. And, I'm trained as a feature film director. I'm trained to work with actors. And I can sense when somebody's giving a bad performance, when somebody's not telling the truth or being honest. And so I really feel like these people are genuine. I really feel like they're telling us the truth. We haven't really had anybody that's tried to fool us or pull wool over our eyes or something else. I mean, we've certainly seen photographs and stuff that we're not sure are anything other than blobs. We've seen a lot of that, but for the most part, the folks that come to us with conviction and enthusiasm and a need to get this off their chest and a need to tell this story to people. Yes. As a matter of fact, we featured two scientists from Skinwalker Ranch in our film, Dr. Travis Taylor, and Eric, and both of the Eric Bard, and both Eric and Travis have seen. We actually know that they've seen more extraordinary things than what the History Channel will put on TV, because they're not sure that the audience is ready for it yet, which is very interesting. So I can tell you, I'm not going to name names, but I can tell you that a person that isn't on the show anymore, but has been on the show before, that's a friend of mine. He was in the first couple of episodes. Both he and his wife were on Skinwalker Ranch, and they saw a portal open above them, and they saw a creature fly out of it. And I know Eric has actually had a computer come to life, if you will, and literally spell out in static, "I am alive." So there's been some really, really weird stuff. One thing that I can say is we spent a night just kind of hanging out with the production crew of the TV show, and they told us that things are constantly happening to their cameras, constantly happening to their media, which is, like these little cards right here is what we film everything on. And it's a terabyte of data right here in just this little card. And they'll film something extraordinary and they'll go to put it into their computer to transfer it and to back it up, and it'll be gone. It'll be erased. Whatever it was, it's like, nope, you can't have that. So they'll erase it. And so these guys were they were kind of complaining because it makes their job difficult. It makes our job difficult when stuff like this happens to us too. So the phenomenon that's out there is censoring certain things it doesn't want the world to know about. I guess I could just say that I feel like, and a lot of people say this, I feel like the veil is getting thinner and thinner. And I feel like it's only a matter of time, only another few years before we actually, these things are actually disclosed. They're out in the public eye. And I think that, artificial intelligence might play a part in that, because now there's algorithms that we might be able to predict when we might see one based on migration routes and food and patterns and stuff. Humans work in patterns, animals work in patterns. I would believe that Bigfoot would work in a pattern too. So there might be some predictability behind that. We're working on a bunch more stuff. We're going to just keep it coming. I don't think that we're going to stop if they're disclosed, because I think there's going to still be a massive amount of information that's going to be out there that's going to be fascinating. That's when the journey really, truly might begin. So I just would say for people to just keep an open mind. And when you're out in nature, open your heart to the possibilities of mystery.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP. Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a PDF copy or order a beautiful printed copy of issue 6 of the new Thinking Aloud magazine.